the FBI must return to an apolitical, objective application of investigations and operations in the United States. The FBI can't have a political position. The law is not a political tool. Under Mr. Patel's leadership, if he is successfully confirmed, I think you'll see the FBI make a very notable shift back to that more objective, apolitical position.
Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. Can you just start by giving us a bit of background about yourself and your involvement in the FBI?
Sure. And it's a pleasure to be with you today and to visit with you and your audience. And my name is Chris Piehota. I spent 25 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And at the time of my retirement, I was one of the 8 most senior career executives for the organization, and held a number of different operational and managerial roles through my career. So I've seen and done most everything in the FBI that there is to be done.
Now, Donald Trump has nominated Kash Patel to be the director of the FBI, and he's currently going through his confirmation hearings in the Senate. He's come under a lot of scrutiny. What do you think should be his main priorities if he is confirmed in the Senate as FBI director?
I think if Mr. Patel is successful, I would counsel him and recommend that he look at 3 primary parts of the FBI's organizational makeup. The first area would be the leadership environment. The second area would be the organizational culture that is in place now. And the third area would be an audit of the FBI's operational practices. Those 3 factors are going to make up and comprise the soul of the FBI. And he has to look at the more strategic areas that an FBI director would have control and influence over.
One of the things that he said he could focus on as director is exposing the child sex abuse around the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. And in the Senate hearings today, we saw him promising to try and expose some of those people linked with Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think that he could expose a lot of these, classified information or things that perhaps have been hidden from the public so far around the Jeffrey Epstein scandal?
I think he'll make every effort to do so. I've met Mr. Patel in passing. I think he has a firm desire to improve transparency and try to repair the public's trust of the FBI. And I think he'll work with his partners across the government that have different stakeholder interests in the Epstein case, and he'll try to release as much information as he can.
Now, the Democrats at this hearing today have focused heavily on Kash Patel's support for those people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, supporting their pardons that Donald Trump gave just a week ago. Is this a concern of yours that Kash Patel has been supporting some of these people that, that the Democrats would accuse of being violent or even being violent against police officers?
I don't have a direct concern about it. I think that if you look on both sides of our political spectrum in the United States, there were people supporting rioting in the United States. People were being arrested, and there were people in our government structure that were actually collecting money to help bail them out. So it depends on your personal preferences and philosophies on who's right or wrong. I don't think Mr. Patel in any way supports violence or overthrow of the government or anything like that. I think he was trying his best to try to support some of the families through financial hardships and things like that.
And do you agree with Mr. Patel that the FBI and the DOJ have been weaponized by the Democrats as a kind of political tool to use against their opponents, whether that be Donald Trump, his allies, or Catholics and people who are anti-abortion? He feels that the FBI has been used against them in an improper way. Do you agree with him?
I think the FBI has lost some of its ability to navigate and resist political influence over time. The FBI, I think, was trying to please the administration that was in power, and some of the folks that were at the very senior managerial levels of the FBI may have had similar ideas or beliefs as the previous administration, so they weren't as resistant as they could have been to some of the investigative requests or the investigative direction received from the White House.
In terms of the abuse of power or the potential abuse of power of the FBI over the last 10 years or perhaps 20 years, does this compare to when J. Edgar Hoover was the director of the FBI, when he infamously used that organization to his own ends without thinking about the checks and balances that should have been used upon him?
I think the circumstances are a little different now. I think what you have is not as much use of the organization for the director's political ends. I think the most recent director, Director Ray, he wasn't a hands-on director. He was more of a caretaker director. He allowed certain people and maybe groups of people inside the organization to gain a lot of authority and influence over how the organization conducted its business. And that's where they went down some, I would say, unproductive roads.
And to those people who went down those roads, do you think that they should be held accountable in some way? Should Kash Patel attempt to purge the FBI of people that he believes have done wrong in the Biden administration or are working against President Trump?
I don't know if a purge is the right way to go about things, but I do think he has to reorient the organization and bring it back to its apolitical, professional, objective enforcement of the federal law in the United States. And if there are people who, for some reason, they can't put their personal feelings or their political feelings away, then maybe the FBI is not for them anymore, and maybe he can help them find something that's better suited, for their personal beliefs. But I do think that his goal is going to be to reorient the FBI back to what it once was, and it's going to be kind of a back to the future situation for the FBI.
There has been a huge focus from the FBI in recent years on so-called domestic terrorists, and some Republicans have complained about the broad nature of the definition of what a domestic terrorist is, labeling parents domestic terrorists and so on. Do you think it's time the FBI moves away from this obsession with, domestic terrorists, misinformation, essentially going after people who perhaps they politically disagree with and becoming more of a neutral organization?
I think the FBI must return to an apolitical, objective application of investigations and operations in the United States. The FBI can't have a political position. The law is not a political tool. The law is the law, and I think you'll see under the new administration and under the new Department of Justice and under Mr. Patel's leadership, if he is successfully confirmed, I think you'll see the FBI make a very notable shift back to that more objective, apolitical position.
Now, in the quarter century that you were at the FBI, did you witness yourself any kind of politicization of that institution? Did you see the kind of corruption and, double standards and so on that Republicans have been complaining about?
Well, I wouldn't say corruption, but I would say that some of the processes were changed, and some of the FBI's time-tested and true investigative techniques were abandoned and or minimized. And some of the folks in the very senior leadership positions allowed their personal preferences and their personal agendas to start taking the place of FBI cultural norms that we prided ourselves on being apolitical and objective, and some of the senior leaders moved us away from that and allowed the organization to become seen as having a political position, which that can't happen, and it's going to get rectified.
Now, you saw those hearings today with Kash Patel. Did you get the sense that this man is qualified for the position? Were you impressed by his answers, and do you think that he'll make it through this confirmation process?
First off, Mr. Patel has a very broad background in the national security, law enforcement, and litigation fields. So he has a good sense of the threat environment and current and emerging that the FBI faces. So he understands the issues. He's worked at the Department of Defense. He's also worked over at our Director of National Intelligence Office. He's got a very good broad background. So from a experience standpoint, I think he's in good shape there. He's got the confidence of our current president, so those are pretty good bona fides. And I think he'll make it through the confirmation process. Today's when I was watching today's uh, confirmation hearing, there weren't any real issues that came up. It was more centered on a few, I would say, almost pet issues for some of the senators, but I think he's going to do just fine.
And are there any specific investigations that you would like to see under his leadership, or anything that you think should be revealed to the public? We talked about Jeffrey Epstein, but I know that, again, a lot of Republicans are concerned about whether the FBI spied on Donald Trump's campaign in the first, in his first election in 2015. Is there anything specific that you think should be investigated or revealed to the public?
I don't think there's any specific investigation I'd like to see. I think Mr. Patel is going to have to get on location. He's going to have to take inventory and stock of the organization and where it stands. Look at some of the higher priority operations and cases that the organization is involved with. And then he's going to have to take the instruction or direction from the White House, from the Department of Justice, and then under his own vision for the organization, and develop a plan of action moving forward. The only thing I would like to see from the FBI is a return to the stoic professionalism that characterized the organization when I joined, and as I learned how to be an FBI agent, I learned from the old breed of agents who they built the FBI's reputation, and I'd like to see us return to that from an operational standpoint. One other thing, if I could add, we've had the last several years of fairly open and lax border enforcement. So I think that's going to be one of his primary objectives, is to get a handle on the new threat environment that we have in the United States and start working more closely with our state, local, and federal partners to mitigate threats and look for the safety of our communities.
You talk about returning the FBI to its previous professional, neutral, modes of operation. I mentioned J. Edgar Hoover earlier. I'm curious, what is your opinion of the man? Do you think that he's someone that we should be looking up to or emulating in some way? He's incredibly controversial, but some people praise him for his going after communists in the 1950s and so on. What's your view of Edgar Hoover?
I think Hoover was a pioneer in his time. I think he stayed in the position too long. He was in the position for, I think, 40 plus years. That's way too long of a time for him to be in that type of a role, having that type of power in our government. So I think he was almost a victim of the circumstances himself, that he was there too long. And that's why the FBI director term has been now limited to one 10-year term, right? And Hoover's situation created that new requirement. So I think he was a pioneer of his time. I think he was a patriot on some level. And I think that if we were to look back at some of his practices and some of his achievements, I think we can model some modern achievements after them. But I think Mr. Hoover did his thing in his time, and he's best left where he was.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.